So thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I come into this space of serious games and game-based learning from the education world as a learning scientist with a background in STEM education. And today I will share some of my most recent and currently developing work with you. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge Jonas' contribution to this project. Johannes Meyerhofer is a PhD student in JKU and has been working closely with me since the start of this project in summer 2024. So as you probably already know, game-based learning can increase student motivation, support their learning, and importantly, cultivate communication amongst learners. Based on a review of published studies, PADO identified some activities that are typical of game-based learning implementation in a formal learning environment, such as classrooms. These activities were gameplay training, lectures or mini lectures, and the distribution of handouts prior to students playing the game. They also included providing scaffolding, classroom management, and technical support while students were playing the game. And even though most of the studies he reviewed did not include any post-game activities, the ones that did included activities of debriefing and discussion and reflection. What this structure highlights is that game-based learning implementation in formal learning environments, just like the use of any other kind of instructional materials really, involves many activities that are interconnected, important, and even necessary to ensure a meaningful, engaging, and supportive learning experience for youth. So it's not just the game itself, but rather the game in relation with everything else that is going on in the classroom to support and guide the learning experience. Despite the potential benefits of game-based learning, teachers are often reluctant to use it in their classrooms. Some of the most common concerns they have are challenges they might face with effective implementation of games, as well as the use of technology in classrooms when it comes to digital games specifically. They also often face challenges obtaining games in the first place and are often worried or feel constrained by the formal curriculum and the educational system, for example, fixed class schedules. An underlying issue that feeds into pretty much all of these concerns is that the vast majority of teachers did not have any opportunities to experience game-based learner as learners themselves. As with all instructional innovations, implementing something that feels very novel can be both intimidating and risky. So if we want teachers to feel more comfortable with game-based learning, innovate and experiment with it, we really need to provide ample opportunities for them to learn how to do that. One way in which this can happen is through carefully designed teacher training initiatives. Research has shown that such initiatives can enhance teachers' competencies to select, evaluate, and utilize game-based learning as an instructional tool. This was the motivation behind the work I'm sharing with you here today. Last summer, I developed an introductory course for game-based learning in mathematics that I taught in the 2024 fall semester to math students enrolled in the teaching training program here at JKU. I will first share some information about how the course was designed, then what data we collected, and finally some initial insights into the game design preferences students in my course had for games they developed. The course was roughly divided into two parts. The first part, that comprised 7 lessons, included short introductory lectures on a few key themes, gameplay sessions and reflections, and engagement with a small selection of readings that meant to supplement in-class gameplay and discussions. You can see here the games students played as part of this course, either in class or as homework. The second part of the course comprised of 8 lessons. During this time, students worked in small groups to redesign a game and create a lesson plan to teach a topic of their choice for secondary math classrooms in Austria. Class time was devoted to work time and included a few structured sessions for reviewing, testing, and offering feedback to each other. At the end of the semester, students presented their games and lesson plans in a poster session. I taught this course last semester, and it was the context of a small-scale mixed methods research study exploring early career math teachers' attitudes and experiences with game-based learning. There were 29 students enrolled in the course. We invited all of them to participate in the research project, and 21 of them agreed. We collected survey responses about participants' views on games and learning, written reflections regarding their experiences learning about GBL and their readiness to implement GBL in their classrooms. We also collected exit tickets, documented early work on participants' final projects, their lesson plans and game materials, and their final posters. For the purposes of this presentation, I used participants' game materials and lesson plans. I developed a coding rubric that was informed by the literature regarding basic game design characteristics, such as genre and number of players. And given the context for which these games were developed, I also coded for length of playtime and length of instructional unit. Finally, I used inductive coding to capture the mathematical content for which the games were developed and consulted the Austrian National Curriculum for Secondary Mathematics before finalizing the wording of these codes. So here's what happened. There were 9 groups in total, and these are the games they developed, or I guess screenshots of elements of their games. I'm sure you can recognize what they were inspired from, at least in some of the cases. So for the actual breakdown, the games participants in our study designed were adapted from Monopoly, Sorry, Activity, Da Vinci Code, Exploding Kittens, and Bingo. There were also 2 games whose design was informed by Logiphases in one case and Escape from the Aliens in Outer Space and Capture the Flag in the other case. I separated them because the ones that were inspired by actually diverged quite a bit from the original game, including the storyline. So I wanted to give credit to the students' work. The mathematical content the games dealt with more often was algebra, and this included integers, algebraic expressions, percentages and fractions, and measurement and units. There were also games for geometry, the coordinate system, data, and probabilities, and 2 games that were designed as review activities, so included multiple content areas. In terms of the genre, all 9 groups chose to use and design tabletop games, the vast majority of which were multiplayer games, either multiplayer competitive or 2-sided team games. There was an interesting case in the way Bingo was redesigned, which made the game a combination of single-player game at the beginning and the typical multiplayer game later on. In terms of time characteristics, there was some variation on the duration of the instructional units, with the majority of them require no more than 2 class periods to implement. In terms of duration of active playtime, the games that participants in our study designed lasted for the most part either between 16 and 30 minutes or more than 46 minutes. At first glance, these insights are not really surprising. However, I think they have some important implications for the design of games meant to be used for learning in formal learning environments and with non-adult learners. Keep in mind that these games were designed for use in secondary math classrooms. For me, the most salient observations were informed not by what participants in our study chose, but rather by what they excluded. For example, not a single group worked with digital games. Even though we explored digital games as part of the course and I introduced the user-friendly digital game design platform to them that could also be used by their own students, they all chose tabletop games. I understand that this could also be because of the constraints of the course itself and the participants' familiarity, or rather lack of familiarity, with digital game design. However, students in my course often also shared that they were very skeptical about introducing digital games to their students, as they thought youth are already spending a lot of their non-school time on their digital devices. The other excluded game design feature was single-player games. Again, even though we explored a single-player game in the course, no student group chose to work with one. The only exception, if we can call them that, was the group who adapted bingo that I mentioned earlier. They had included an activity at the beginning for students to work backwards and create algebraic expressions equivalent to the ones in the bingo card. And that was designed to be done independently. There wasn't really anything in our data that could explain why participants in our study showed the preference for multiplayer games. If I were to guess, I would say that it was probably a motivation for students to interact and learn with each other, to experience learning and fun as part of a learning community rather than as individuals. Independent learning is very common with the traditional lectures and worksheets, and perhaps games were seen as an opportunity for introducing different social configurations in the learning environment. Finally, even though time constraints consistently come up as barriers to game-based learning implementation, participants in our study exhibited a variation in the length of instructional units and games designed that suggest teachers will consider using longer, more complex games in their classrooms if they think the time investment would be justified by the potential learning benefits. To close, I would like to remind us all that instructional innovation is a complex enterprise requiring the solution of several sets of connected problems, and something that instructors might prefer in one context might not be what they would prefer in a different context. For example, it is likely that many secondary math teachers might prefer tabletop multiplayer games for use in their classrooms. Yet, if we were to look at what they might prefer to use for homework or for providing individualized support, I expect this could look quite differently. So, making our attempts at game design all the more complex and fun. Thank you.